Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Progressively Incorrect. My name is Zach Groeschel, and we have some amazing guests here today talking about the writing revolution and the Hochman method and cognitive science and all types of topics. I will let them introduce themselves in just a moment, but I wanted to bring your attention to the sponsors of this podcast, which is John Catt Educational, which publishes some of the best books in education, including my new book, Just Tell Them: The Power of Explanations and Explicit Teaching. I will be sharing links to the entire John Catt catalog in the show notes, so go ahead and check it out and start your evidence-based learning journey. Hello, everyone. It is so great to have you on the podcast. Let's just go around in this order. Judith, can you start us off and introduce yourself and tell us about your work?
Well, I'm Judith Hochman, and I was an educator for many decades. I guess I should use the present tense. And most recently, the founder of the Writing Revolution and the author of the book, The Writing Revolution. The first is an organization, a not-for-profit organization, teaching explicit writing instruction. And I'm here to talk about the Writing Revolution and its 10 years of really astounding success in terms of its reach and its impact.
Awesome. Let's go on over to Christine, who behind the scenes really helped us get this call together. Christine, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, and I appreciate you letting me do that, enter your life in that way. My name is Christine Teahan. I am the co-director of academics at the Writing Revolution. I was a special education teacher for many years before joining the organization, and I was lucky enough to be trained by Dr. Hochman in this method at a school that used it across grades and content. And I taught all the content areas in middle school. So I got to witness the impact and be part of that. And it is a joy to be here every day, getting this work out to the masses in the best way we can. So thanks for having us.
Awesome. And Toni-Ann, go ahead and round this off, these introductions.
Hi. First, Zach, thank you so much. My name is Toni-Ann Vroom. I'm the co-CEO of the Writing Revolution. I've been with the organization since the very beginning, so now 10 years in, and came to TWR and the Hochman method by way of being a high school social studies teacher for a number of years in a very large public high school here in New York City, a school that adopted the Hochman method at the time, similar to Christine, across subject areas and across grades, and saw some tremendous success and wanted nothing more than to help Dr. Hochman get this out to as many teachers as possible. So I left that school with my fellow co-CEO, Dr. Dina Zalayo, who's not on this call today, but my counterpart, to really help Judy in getting this off the ground. And now 10 years in, just so excited to be able to share with you some of our learnings along the way. So thank you so much.
Thank you all. So the cool kids are calling this TWR, huh? Is that what I need to do to like the Writing Revolution? TW. Okay, it is shorter. I guess I can jump aboard. Well, we're going to start with Judith, Dr. Hochman. It's going to be hard because I have so much respect to go with first names, but you did ask me to. Judith, you created the method that underpins the Writing Revolution, and it's totally taken off. Like, honestly, that's now the first thing people will say when, have you tried it, Zach? Do you recommend it? They'll ask me about it. And it differs from sort of maybe other models of writing that exist in schools, or even if they don't have a writing model at all, this is what is a possible solution for schools. Can you tell us about the method and sort of how it got started and what advantages this model has?
Yes, of course. And you can call me Judy, not Judith, Dr. Hoff. The way this got started was way back in the 80s when I was in a school for learning and language disabled students who had difficulty learning in traditional ways. But one of the things I saw that was very hard for them is that they really had trouble learning how to write. And the predominant methods at that time were the adult version of Writer's Workshop had been dropped down to an approach used for younger children. And there was the traditional approach based on grammar, diagramming sentences, learning the labels of speech. And neither one of them were very successful, particularly with our students. So I began to try a variety of strategies. And at that time, there was very little out in the research about explicit instruction of effective expository writing, writing that explains or informs and really focuses on what children need to do the most as they go through school, into the workplace, and in life as well. And I felt that should be our focus at this school. So we began to teach it. And the mission of the school was to return students to the mainstream. And a remarkable thing happened, because when our students returned to the mainstream, we got a lot of feedback about them writing better than many of their general education students. So classes that we were given in a teacher training institute at that time, which started out as mainly special ed teachers, gradually began to see a very big increase in regular education teachers, because they wanted to know what we were doing that was different than what was being taught. And that was the birth of what now is the writing revolution and this method.
Love it. I mean, you mentioned something that happened to me, which was that I went through all of school just sort of thinking I was an okay writer, but they would continuously tell me, like, write down a paragraph about this or summarize this, or we were constantly doing these little snippets of expository writing without having ever been taught how to do it. And over time, we're supposed to sort of that got longer and lengthier, and it started to become, bigger probes and bigger assignments. And all of a sudden, I'm in college and I'm looking around me and I'm realizing that some of the folks in this room do know how to write, and the rest of us have to carry the burden of both learning the content that is in this advanced college course and learning how to write at high school or college level. I didn't get any great writing instruction, but we're going to return to this method over and over again and kind of the components. Let's just go to like an example of some of the powerful techniques, so people that are listening can kind of have an idea of a concrete example of some of them. Each of the remaining panelists, Christine and Toni-Ann, have a favorite technique that they're going to bring to us. So can you share with me, Christine, a technique or tool you feel is particularly powerful in the writing revolution method?
I'm actually going to have Toni-Ann answer that first, because first of all, you speaking about your college experience, I had the exact same experience. I soared through high school, but when I got to college and all of a sudden I had to like organize my writing and write for this specific purpose, I floundered, and it took me a while to get back in. And one of the things that struck me, I was fresh out of grad school and I got trained in this method, and the outlines alone, I just was sitting there thinking what a difference it would have made if I had learned how to use the outlines in this method. So I'm going to let Toni-Ann start off and talk about the outlines and why.
Christine, we're all kindred in this, because I think we all had that first college paper that was marked up all over the place, but really it opened my eyes to, I really don't know how to do this. And I selected the outlines. We spoke a lot about this, Christine, because we all have some favorites. And really, before even getting to the outlines, I just want to make the point that all of the strategies are intended to be used in concert. There's no, cherry picking. If I just do the outlines, automatically I'm going to become this fantastic writer. Or if I just do the sentence level strategies, which we love, and they're the foundation of the method, that's going to be it. But the outlines are so powerful because they really are the structure of the method. The sentence is the foundation, but the students need that structure. And so often we hear, and speaking as a former high school teacher, how many times students just don't know how to get started. They'll say things like, I have all these ideas in my head, I just don't know how to get them out. We were actually just speaking with a teacher not that long ago who said so often the students stare at that blank page and they go blank. So the outline is something that really enables them to just start to think about, all right, what is this mostly going to be about? How could I begin? What are just some of the ideas and details that I have? How can I sequence that? And then all of a sudden, they almost have this confidence of how to tackle, whether it's a single paragraph, whether it's multiple paragraphs, because they have that structure in place. And anyone who's taught these outlines, which they're very simple by nature. They're linear, they're very clean. Anyone that's ever taught them see how they become tools that elevate students' thinking. We actually, and Judy's going to remember this because it was about 10 years ago, we were visiting a school in Washington, D.C., and this little student came over to us and told us, you, Judy, Dr. Hochman, the outline changed my brain. And we were like falling over on the floor because of this little child is telling us what the research tells us, that really these outlines go a very long way in elevating their thinking and really shaping their thinking. And the fact that they're consistent make it so that the students don't have to relearn from one assignment to the next a new graphic organizer, which so many of us have done. You know, I'm going to use the hamburger organizer or the Oreo or the Venn diagram. And then you go from one assignment to the next and you're relearning the diagram, and it's not really helping you write that finished piece because it was never designed to do that. But these outlines really are designed in the way that a paragraph or an essay should flow. So I would definitely choose that as my top choice. And then I'm going to, Christine, you're going to piggyback off me because they do go together.
Yeah, my favorite strategy when I first learned the method was the outlines. But then as I started actually teaching this and really understood the method, my favorite strategy became the unelaborated paragraph. I was honestly intimidated by it at first because it's a lot of skills at once. But now, as I understand, many years later, and what I tell teachers all the time is that's actually what brings everything you've done at the foundation level together. So when you're teaching these sentence level strategies and you're doing it recursively and you're, interleaving these strategies and you're reviewing these and you are helping the students own those in these different content. And you're also teaching the students how to outline, which you can do without even having them write the paragraph. They can just practice using that outline and thinking about how to organize and structure their paragraphs. When they get to the actual paragraph, one of the most important things you can teach your students to do is revise. How do you revise? You apply all the things you learned up to that point. But it's not simple. The transfer of writing skills is actually quite difficult. So what the unelaborated paragraph is a paragraph that the teacher writes in very simple sentences, no real extra details, no transitions. You leave all of those components of a cohesive, detailed paragraph out, and then you use the sentence level strategies as the directions, and you guide students through revising the paragraph using the skills that they've learned at the sentence level. And there's a few benefits to that, many actually. But one is that, first of all, you are giving them a piece of writing that is not their own to practice these skills. Because we know that a student who has written an actual paragraph has devoted time and energy to that paragraph. And when they get it back and you're telling them to make it better and here's all the ways, that's an emotional drain. And that's not so motivating, especially when they don't actually have those skills yet. They're not confident in it. And so you get to take the emotional piece out of it by saying, hey, here's a paragraph I wrote, and you're going to make it better, which of course they'll love to do. And you use the strategies you want them to practice. So you can, have them improve the topic sentence by adding in a positive. You can have them add details by expanding. You have them make more complex sentences by combining. Those are all sentence level strategies. They practice one sentence at a time, and you show them how to apply those skills to make the paragraph better. And that's when the connections really start to happen. And then one other piece of this that is a benefit you can't even see until you really use this tool well is that same language, you're going to gradually release them in this process, by the way. You start by saying, improve topic sentence by adding in a positive. And then eventually you just say, improve topic sentence, and you get to the point where they're becoming more independent, and you use that same language when you give feedback on their writing. So you have this tool that frees you up from rewriting the student work for them and having them copy it passively, which doesn't teach them anything. And you get to use the simplified language that is drawing upon prior knowledge, prior skills, in order to help them make their writing better. And the amount of time that teachers can save on that kind of feedback and the actual impact it has on student learning is something that you just have to witness to understand.
Let me tell you what teachers are telling me, right? When I go to different schools, they tell me that teaching writing in elementary school is like their least favorite time of the day. And they admit oftentimes the reason is they don't really know what to do. I found myself when I was teaching writing becoming a good manager of the writing process. Like I cut out everybody's names and I put them on little pins, and they would move themselves from pre-writing to drafting to revising to editing to publishing, and then they would start all over again, right? And I have them move tables into different places, and they would just constantly be writing. I would look at them and I'm like, I've created a world of writers, but I just knew I wasn't really teaching writing. I didn't have the strategies. I didn't understand how to get kids to apply things they previously learned. They were just kind of told to revise or told to time to copy and paste what you did over here to a new piece of paper because you're going to present it tomorrow. That was about it. I'm very curious, Judy, about did you start kind of discovering on your own how other people around you and how you were writing? Was that sort of the beginning, the origins of this, that just it was lacking? You needed a more systematic approach. Did you find research at the time that sort of supported these ideas, or where did it sort of come from?
Well, it came from standing in front of a class of students as an administrator, so I had a little control there, seeing how difficult it was for them to express themselves in the form of written language. They wrote the way they speak, and writing the way you speak is neither as accurate nor as precise as writing really requires. And so we had to start at a very granular level. Both Christine and Toni-Ann referred to the sentence work, and that's where I began really focusing on the basic building block of all writing, because there's a form to sentences that can be very unique to written language that's rarely heard in spoken language. And what I was also seeing is the way we deal with kids orally, and this was not based on research, because as I said earlier, there was very little research, Zach. And so with About Your Outstanding book, explicit instruction in writing was really limited in a way to two approaches that weren't giving teachers the resources they needed to make competent writers. And we moved along with the sentence work in areas where it was easy to see that teacher practice could be changed. For example, the way we asked them to answer questions rather than answering open-ended questions like Lincoln's speech is remembered today, Lincoln's Gettysburg speech is remembered today, or why is Lincoln's speech remembered today? If we say the Gettysburg Address is remembered today because the Gettysburg speech is remembered today, but the Gettysburg speech is remembered today, so we're asking them to think at an entirely different level. And that's what I mean by changing teachers' practice. If I say, Zach is interviewing us today, that's a very simple, basic sentence. But if I say, Zach, an excellent author and interviewing us, is asking good questions today, that's giving the reader much more information regarding a part of speech called an appositive, which is very rarely heard in spoken language, but in written language, you see that very frequently. So giving kids directly the structures of written language, putting them in mind of their audience and what an audience needs to know, becomes a critical piece of what's on and a very important form of communication.
I love it. I want to kind of dispel that myth there, because maybe people are hearing what you just said and think we're returning to the way grammar instruction traditionally was taught. And
Right.
so they hear the word appositive, or they hear that we're talking about sentences, and maybe they're imagining that, like you said earlier, the diagramming sentences and so on. So how does the writing revolution differ from old school grammar lessons?
It differs from old school grammar lessons that the focus is not on grammar and labels, because that really doesn't inform how kids compose. the grammar that we teach, like the term appositive or like the term conjunction, like but because, these are the things that can really enhance a student's writing. So those are the things that, and the terms that we focus on. Well, actually, we found pretty quickly that the improvement in their writing between giving them strategies that make their sentences more complex, enhances their reading comprehension, can enable critical thinking at a level like Toni-Ann mentioned, this improves my brain, and just giving them an opportunity to express themselves with far more clarity. And equally important, it's so empowering to teachers. They finally have a way to teach writing effectively, because over the years, we learned through the research that just saying summarize the chapter or summarize the events leading up to the Civil War, that's not teaching them how to summarize. That's not teaching them how to pull out the salient details of that particular event. And so we kept breaking it down into granular parts until the students become, it's part of their own repertoire.
I love it. So now the writing revolution is maybe the adopted version of conferences like Research Ed, I swear. But other ones too. I saw your co-author Natalie Wexler gave an awesome keynote presentation around cognitive load theory and writing. And over time, people that are enthusiasts in this space of cognitive load theory have made the connected the dots and find that writing revolution is just sort of perfectly demonstrates the effects and the procedures of cognitive load theory. So I'm curious, Judy, had you heard of the theory or of this type of science when you were developing this, or did you just sort of intuit it from working with kids who struggle to write?
First of all, what I noticed very early on is that this wasn't limited to kids who struggle. It was really basically a huge population that had trouble expressing themselves the way we would like them to. And cognitive load theory wasn't even on the horizon. I don't know if the term was around 40 years ago. At that point, it was intuitive. But then the more I learned about it, the more I saw, wait, we're on the right track here. We're not encumbering students with vague directions like summarize this chapter, or why don't you organize your writing more effectively? We're giving them ways to do that. And when you say add in a positive, we want to tell them what in a positive does that will make your sentence sound, not just sound better and look more sophisticated, but gives the audience, the all-important audience, more information. So as we moved along, we followed the emerging research and of course kept researching ourselves. And we saw that, hey, this is working. And when we noticed that something wasn't working as effectively as it was, we kept trying other, techniques, and we're pleased with the outcomes.
That's awesome. Something that is very unique to Writing Revolution that may or may not be well known. It's emphasis on integrating it as into the content areas as opposed to being taught exclusively as its own subject during the day. And that might be confusing, or that might be for a school district who's deciding to kind of go down this road, that might be one of the first things you need to talk about. Maybe, Christine and Toni-Ann both working with all these different schools, telling me about this sort of the separate subject of writing versus integration, and how you kind of pitch that and explain that to schools who are coming in and deciding to adopt.
Chances are, even in those schools where writing is being treated as a separate subject, there is some element of writing that is happening throughout the day. It's a comprehension question that's aligned, in the curriculum. So it's not that students aren't writing, but what schools are recognizing, whether they're using a unified curriculum, whether it's something that they made themselves, is that we're always looking for opportunities to check for understanding, or to have students reflect on what they had just read. How has that been working for you? What have the results been? And what they are doing, and the schools really that have taken this, and districts, and in, say, Louisiana, they did this at the state level with their ELA curriculum, is they take a look at that and say, okay, all of those opportunities where we are assessing understanding, all those opportunities where we're asking students to write something is an opportunity for them to be using one of these strategies to do almost double duty, reflect on what they learned, the teachers could check understanding, and the students are learning a skill at the same time. So it's even been dubbed at this point revolutionizing, with a capital R, revolutionizing the curriculum and integrating the two. I mean, at a personal level, that's what attracted me to this method, because as it was, I was time strapped. I'm teaching a social studies curriculum that culminates in a high stakes exam at the end of the year. How am I doing both at the same time? And you're not doing two things at once. You are weaving it in to your instruction. So for my high school age social studies students, they didn't feel like, all right, now we're doing a writing lesson. If I went in there and said, all right, we're going to learn about positives today, they might shut down. But when I'm teaching a lesson about Mansa Musa, and I say Mansa Musa, the leader of Mali, it's so seamless that often they don't even realize that it's happening. So teachers are seeing that these tools work so well in lieu of what they were doing in the past. For me, it was maybe at that end of that Mansa Musa lesson, all right, write a postcard to a friend as if you were in Mali, remarking on what you saw. No, instead of that, I'm going to do something that's a bit more high leverage. And yeah, Christine, I mean, I'm sure you're seeing the same thing in the schools where you're visiting all the time.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, this is my jam, this topic, because I actually started off college as a math major. And between high school and college, I took over a dozen math and science classes because I just loved it so much. I never really saw myself doing what I do now back then. So my first love was math, always. And when I became a special education teacher and I was working with children with mostly with dyslexia and various language-based learning disabilities, a large part of my job was to help them express themselves in all the content areas. And this was the tool. So I got to use this. I used it in science. I used it in math. And now, you know, a lot of states, I know New York State, where I live, is changing their tests. The science test is going to change, and they're going to require more literacy skills on these state tests. And we're not teaching to the test. That's not the goal here. But the problem that leads to this is that people have to be able to express themselves no matter what it is they're learning about, because even in the field of math and the field of science, everything is built on research. And how do you express the things that you've discovered and found except in writing? You have to communicate that so the next person can build on that idea. And college professors and people out here are desperate for students to come to them with the ability to write, and they're not. It's a massive problem. And so applying these skills to those content areas is solving for many different issues. And then going back to the schools that we work in, one of the things that stands out when you are in a school that is using this method across the content is the confidence in student writing. First of all, you see students who actually you mentioned before that teachers, that's their least favorite part of the day. Students too, because it's all about the confidence. You don't know what you're doing, so why do you want to do it? Nobody wants to do what they don't know how to do for the most part. But you see the confidence. And what happens when the method is used the way that it's intended to is you don't spend some portion of every single day explicitly teaching the specific skill. You teach that skill, and then you allow them to practice the skill by embedding it in what they're learning. And so they might see in a positive strategy in math and in science and in social studies and in language arts in a 2-week span. And that using that is more like a vehicle for the conversation and the expression of thought than it is an explicit writing lesson every time. And so the more exposure and the more practice they get with it, the more they start to internalize the skill and they're able to apply it elsewhere. So the impact is massive. It's just can be embedded in so many places and so many lessons in any content.
Yeah, because I'll talk to teachers about, like, in my coaching, you know, they have a due now, and I'm like, maybe you should have asked them a question that required them to write, or for their exit tickets. I'm like, that would probably been best to have been a written response, or maybe you should have done a stop and jot, have everybody jot in their notebooks. And then the answer is, are you kidding me? These kids don't write. These kids, these kids wouldn't write. We would have 2/3 of the class not writing. And And that's the confidence piece that you see in the school, that across the board, kids are not teachers are reducing the expectation for students to write, because in previous years they've not been taught to write, and it's just sort of this vicious cycle where the writing would help them learn the material faster and retain it better, but we're taking that out. Maybe we're filling it with more listening, or maybe only spoken answers, which is only leveraging informal communication and not formal language. It's a problem. In terms of the language, you couldn't call this a curriculum, right? Like, what do you call this book, or this? Do you call it an approach, a framework? I'm very curious, Christine.
You're asking me, I'm going to laugh
Yeah.
because this is a constant conversation. Actually. We talk about this all the time. It is definitely not a curriculum. It is a method of writing that can be applied to any content. It's a methodology. It is not a curriculum. And we technically, as the Writing Revolution, the organization, we are the program. We are the trainers of the method. And so that's how I would describe it. And this is a conversation, so please feel free to correct me on that, Judy and Toni-Ann.
Well, the book and the courses that we give and the workshops that we give describe the method. And no, you're absolutely right. And one of the things I'd like to add is Toni-Ann was the writing coordinator for this high school of 3,000 students. And one of the things that I first noticed there in living color was how the students were incorporating into their oral language some things that we see, that we had taught very explicitly. For example, we taught them how and when to use transitions. So I watched a moot court class. The students were, giving an example of some court proceedings, and they were using terms like therefore and as a result. And so in conclusion, well, these were not things that just popped out of their mind. These were things that they were taught to use when they were writing. And it seeped into their oral language expression, along with a much more precise way of expressing themselves in this moot court exercise. And they weren't reading from script sack. They were just fluently expressing this. And this school of 3,000 students was not a privileged population at all. It was a school on the verge of failure. So, Toni-Ann, you may want to add more to that, and so in England, there's some research supporting this move from explicit instruction in written language to moving to oral language.
Yeah, it's something that stood out to me while I was actually teaching the method was the impact that it had, especially on my English language learners. So we had a very diverse population in our school. Every year I would have at least 1 or 2 sections of students with maybe 9 or 10 different home languages sitting in the same class. And I couldn't possibly help all of them in their individual languages. This was so carefully scaffolded as a method that what you started to see happening was not only that they were responding more in writing, but participating more in the class. And Judy, I remember you coming to visit that class. And I would say the key thing, whether it was in that school or in others, and it's been said here, is the teaching of it. So Zach, back to your example of the opportunities throughout any individual lesson where teachers can be doing writing, 100%, the warm up, the do now, the stop and jot, like in our trainings, we're saying use those, like capitalize on that with the teaching of the strategy. So we say a lot, it's said in the book and it's said in our course over and over again, assigning writing isn't teaching writing. And same goes with the Hochman method. Assigning the Hochman method isn't the same as teaching it. So what we see happening sometimes is teachers might make worksheets with a sentence strategy or an outline, and they're just handed out to the class. And it's almost like business as usual. It's a better strategy, but without those opportunities for that whole class practice, you're not going to hear the things that we're hearing in our schools or see that confidence boost. You're losing that opportunity to use them as tools for conversation and for other things. So I just really want to emphasize that key part. And I think that's why so many people have been coming to the training, because it's like, how do I apply this and actually teach it? Because no one ever taught us as teachers how to teach writing to kids.
Love it. I'm thinking in the point of view of a time-strapped teacher who has just has to teach a lot of math and has to teach a lot of reading in the elementary school, right? And the only time they are given writing maybe is some time they've carved out in the week, and they're seeing writing as a separate subject at this point, right? What they'll often do, because there's so limited time, is they'll use that time for sort of free writing or for sort of narrative writing, right? We'll spend a lot of time writing stories. Kids hate writing already. The thinking goes, let's give them a lot of time to write stories or personal essays or things that just about fantasy things, and it's fun and it's great. But the writing revolution really does emphasize expository writing. To dig more deeply into that, why it's important that students get a leg up, especially in expository writing, versus spending that limited time purely on narrative, as many elementaries do. Maybe we'll go to Judy for that question.
Well, narrative art writing isn't necessarily bad. However, if it's not connected to what they're learning, like, can you give us a sequence of events that led up to the Civil War? That's embedding it in the curriculum, like what we mentioned earlier. Expository writing. Look, in life, and frankly, in middle and high school, you're not asked to write memoirs. You're not asked to write a poem. You're not asked to write a play. And no one really cares what you've done last weekend. They want you to explain and inform a very specific audience and tailor your writing to what you know about what that audience may know or not know. And so in the precious minutes that we have in school, how can we really address this most effectively? We can address this by teaching writing, as I think Toni-Ann and Christine have described very well, in the subject matter that they're learning. Writing is such a powerful learning tool. It really engages everything that we may know in our long-term memory. It helps us learn additional things. It helps us think. It helps us see what we don't know, and it helps our teachers see what they don't know. I mean, it's a skill that really can't be handed off to technology very easily, because we're really working on something that's very unnatural to kids' brains. We're not born with a writing center in our heads any more than we are with a reading center. But these things, particularly writing, which is harder than reading for a whole bunch of reasons, is crucial to a child's thinking, their reading with more comprehension, and what we're seeing they're speaking. And so having everything address the communicative aspect of this, which is explaining and informing, is really where we feel the most instructional time can be given. And I'm not downplaying creative writing like memoirs and journals and so forth. For the child who wants to explore their creative writing further, we think we're giving them the foundation to do so.
Awesome. Yeah, I just think of the child who, and we talk more about this in reading than in writing, but where the child who is asked to read aloud in front of all their peers, and how that moment, can etch itself in that child's mind and self-confidence for the rest of their life. The feeling of being so ashamed, of being confronted with the fact that they cannot read fluently. But in writing, we see the same thing, except that this is the deliverable to the teacher. Every single week, this child is confronted with the fact that not only was this extremely taxing on my working memory, and I put a lot of effort into this, I'm not particularly proud of this result, or that I'm embarrassed about what I've produced. And the kid sitting next to that child who sees that they can't put lots of words down to the page while they're scribbling out tons of sentences. There just seems like a layer of social justice and just fairness to it, making sure we get this right. I think it's really important that we start focusing more on writing in schools. Let's go to our last question, which is really about implementation and impact. How do schools typically learn about the writing revolution, and what impact have you observed in schools that have fully embraced it? I want to hear kind of those success stories, maybe to leave on a motivating note for leaders and so on who are listening to this and they're looking for something to fix their writing. Maybe we'll go to Toni-Ann to start us off.
So it's interesting because educators come to the writing revolution all different ways. We have individual classroom teachers that either read the book or hear about this from a colleague, or they attended a conference and they heard about TWR, or they see something on social media and they come to us. And just as importantly, and you said leaders, and I think that's key to all of this, school leaders, district leaders, and ultimately states are coming to us because they're looking for a unified, cohesive approach that can be used K through 12, because we know the results of people doing things in silos. It might work in that one individual class, but when they go to the next grade and there's no coherence, it's all lost. So increasingly, we're hearing more and more at the leadership level of the need for this in the schools, especially as, say, more districts are adopting, say, a science of reading curricula. Just as much attention should be paid to the writing portion, and they're coming that way. In terms of what we're seeing in schools and success stories, it's remarkable. When it goes beyond the individual class teacher who could see success in their own classroom, but you have that whole team of the teacher, the literacy coach, the principal, the assistant principals, this district leaders all on board and knowledgeable about this, that's when you start to see the change, not only at the student level in their writing and in their confidence and in what they're saying in the classroom, but also, as Judy mentioned, in that teacher practice, that teachers begin to see that this is just not a method for teaching writing, but this is just how we teach. And when students get that consistency from class to class and grade to grade, that's when they really thrive. They know what's expected of them, they know what to do, and they can engage their brain more in the actual content of the curriculum because they're seeing very consistent approaches to how they're expressing their understanding. And Christine, yeah, if you want to piggyback on that.
Honestly, that last question deserves its own hour-long podcast, because the list of benefits is something that honestly even caught me off guard when I started working here. And I saw the benefits for over a decade in the school I worked at previously. But one of the things that stands out in my head when you ask that question is this. A few years ago, we were interviewing teachers at our partner district, Monroe City Schools in Louisiana. The purpose of the interviews was, I don't even really entirely remember why we started this process, but what it ended up becoming was completely different, because what came up over and over again when talking to all these teachers is that the impact it had on them, on their confidence, and on their ability to come together. One of the things I was reading your chapters in Harnessing the Science of Learning that you co-wrote with Nathaniel Swain. And one of the things you talk about, one of the first steps that you can take to make learning easier for students is engagement norms. So, you're speaking more specifically to behaviors, or just routines and just language, the consistency of language, so that from one teacher to the next, from one grade to the next, if we're using that same language, students know what to expect. They feel safer, it's predictable, and they can actually engage in the learning that's about to happen. And take that one step further, the impact of using the same language around writing instruction and the strategies, the impact that has is almost indescribable. It's anecdotal, of course, it's not one of those things you can necessarily measure so easily, but to hear high school teachers talk about that they can go down to the middle school, they can go down to the elementary school, they can, an ELA teacher can work with a science teacher, can work with a math teacher, and they have this common language. And then the impact that has on students, because they see a because button so formatted the same way. They see a sentence expansion formatted the same way. They know what that is. They know what to expect. It's comfort, it's safety, and they get to engage in the content of the writing. They get to feel confident in what they're doing. And that impact has been something that has stood out to me over and over again. And it's something that I just cannot get enough of experiencing and watching happen. And, I could go on, like I said, it could be a whole hour. But that's what I see, the confidence across the board in students and teachers, because they have this common language and common approach that really brings cohesion to the whole entire school.
I love it. And I think that's where, it's important to say, like, this isn't like an add-on, something extra that now we all have to do. What it's doing is, I'm just picturing myself working with some of the 7th grade, like ELA teachers at the middle school I was just at, whose constant biggest frustration was being handed a cohort of kids who cannot express themselves in writing, and who they now like they have to make a choice. Do I carve out some of the curriculum time to sort of reteach something that they should have learned to mastery earlier, or do I just forge ahead, reduce writing, reduce my expectations, and just get all the content conveyed orally? I mean, so I just think thinking about the cumulative nature of writing and how it's hierarchical, and it's not something that's just a quick fix. It has to happen over time for many years. I think people should go check it out. And I love my copy that I'm looking at right now. And I think people need to start thinking more about writing. Christine, Judith, Toni-Ann, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm sure people have got a lot out of this. Where can we find each of you and contact you for more information so that people can learn more about this approach? Let's go to Christine for that question.
Yeah. First of all, the good starting point is thewritingrevolution.org. That is our website, and we have some free resources you can explore, and we have ways for you to get in touch with us that way. So you'll see when you go to Team where our pictures are there, and you'll be able to get in contact with us through the website.
Yes.
Love it. I'll put that in the show note. I'll put that in the show notes for everybody. Anything else, Toni-Ann?
No, same through our website. We're putting out as much material as possible to really, for whether you're a teacher that's been using the Hochman method for decades, or you're someone that's new to the writing revolution, just ways that we can really support you on this journey. Because anything like this, where it's a big instructional shift, could take some time, and we really want to make sure that teachers are as supported as possible. So our site, obviously on social, and we are in a number of conferences this year if you want to learn more about the writing revolution too.
Love it. And it's on people's minds right now, the importance of implementation, right? And so, can buy a bunch of books, but the idea that let's do this right, let's de-implement to implement, and let's do this in a systematic way based on implementation science. I think people need to be thinking about that as well. Thank you, everybody, again. And listeners, if you haven't shared this with someone yet, principal or whatever, I'd love for you to give one of those 5-star ratings and pass this podcast around. I'll keep on, producing content for you on a weekly basis. I really appreciate all of your support. Take care.